The day began deceptively calm. The sun was obscured by thick, heavy clouds, casting a grey pall over the city. Streets were quiet, shops prepared for the day ahead, and people went about their routines, unaware of the nightmare creeping closer. For weeks, meteorologists had been tracking Typhoon No. 3 Wipha, warning of its immense power and the heavy rains it would bring. Yet nothing could prepare the residents for the terrifying combination about to unfold. A perfect storm of floods, fierce winds, and an unexpected tornado tearing through the skies. As the morning wore on, the rain began, first as a drizzle, then escalating into a relentless downpour. Rivers swelled rapidly, overtaking their banks, and water seeped into streets and homes. Trees bent and snapped under the increasing pressure of the wind. The air itself seemed charged with tension, a foreboding silence punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder. Emergency broadcasts crackled through radios and phones, urging citizens to prepare for evacuation. But the warnings felt distant, almost surreal. Many believed their neighborhoods, accustomed to seasonal storms, could withstand what was coming. Then the wind picked up with terrifying speed. Roof tiles flew off houses, power lines sparked and crashed, and debris became deadly missiles hurled through the air. Darkness fell early as storm clouds blotted out the sky. Suddenly, piercing the roar of the tempest, came the unmistakable whistling shriek of a tornado touching down. It carved a violent path, uprooting trees and demolishing everything in its wake. Floodwaters surged simultaneously, turning roads into torrents, sweeping away cars and threatening to drown entire blocks. In the midst of this perfect storm, rescue teams scrambled to act, but the combination of rising waters, fierce winds, and twisted debris made every move perilous. Communications faltered as power grids failed, isolating neighborhoods in darkness and desperation. People huddled in basements, stairwells, and any place that offered a sliver of protection. Phones buzzed with frantic calls for help, but the response was slowed by the chaotic conditions. The city, normally vibrant and alive, now lay shrouded in shadows and danger. The wrath of nature had arrived in full force, challenging every measure of human preparation. This was not just a flood, not merely a windstorm. It was a terrifying confluence of disasters, pushing the limits of survival and resilience. As night fell, the race to save lives was just beginning. The world watched, breath held, as heroes emerged from the darkness, battling the storm to rescue those trapped in its deadly grip. As darkness enveloped the battered city, the true scale of the disaster became terrifyingly clear. Streets, once bustling with life, were now submerged under swirling floodwaters. Trees, cars, and debris formed deadly barricades, blocking any clear path. The howling wind continued its relentless assault, tearing through what little shelter remained. Emergency responders faced a battle unlike any before. The floodwaters surged unpredictably, while tornadic winds twisted and tore at the landscape, rendering traditional rescue methods nearly impossible. Communication lines faltered under the strain. Cell towers went silent, and radio channels crackled with static. Amidst this chaos, stories of desperate struggle and raw human will emerged. Trapped families clung to rooftops, waving for help as water rose inch by inch. Children's cries mingled with the wail of sirens piercing the night air. Rescue teams plunged into the dark, navigating flooded streets in boats barely larger than kayaks. Their mission was clear but perilous: to reach the stranded, to pull the drowning from the grasp of death. Every moment mattered. The cold water sapped strength, and the violent winds threatened to capsize even the most skilled rescuers. Volunteers joined the efforts, locals risking their own lives to ferry the vulnerable to safety. Makeshift rafts were fashioned from debris, lifelines thrown amid swirling currents. The spirit of community shone like a beacon in the gloom. Hospitals overflowed as survivors were brought in, shivering, injured, and traumatized. Medical staff worked tirelessly, battling exhaustion and the threat of disease in the aftermath of the deluge. Yet, even as some found refuge, the storm showed no sign of abating. Reports of collapsed buildings and landslides trickled in, each a new test of endurance. Power outages plunged neighborhoods into pitch blackness, complicating rescue operations and deepening the sense of isolation. Authorities issued urgent warnings. More rain was expected, and the tornado threat remained. Evacuations continued where possible, but for many, escape was impossible. This was a disaster of unprecedented scale, not just the fury of one element, but a deadly symphony of flood, wind, and tornado. Each hazard amplified the other, creating a deadly labyrinth for survivors and rescuers alike. As the night dragged on, every life saved became a triumph against overwhelming odds. But the question loomed heavy: how many more were trapped in the dark, waiting for a miracle? As dawn broke over the battered city, the full extent of the destruction came into heartbreaking focus. Streets once familiar were unrecognizable, turned into lakes, clogged with twisted wreckage, fallen trees, and the remnants of shattered homes. The storm had left behind a trail of ruin, a cruel testament to nature's fury unleashed without mercy. Communities were shattered. Entire neighborhoods had been swept away or buried beneath mud and debris. Families mourned lost loved ones, their homes, their memories, swallowed by floodwaters or crushed by wind and collapsed buildings. The air was thick with grief, the silence punctuated by sobs and distant calls for help. Emergency shelters overflowed with the displaced, faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. The bitter cold and dampness worsened their suffering, but the warmth of solidarity brought fleeting comfort. Strangers became family as survivors shared what little they had left: food, blankets, and hope. Rescue and recovery efforts shifted gears, becoming a marathon instead of a sprint. Search teams combed through debris, risking collapse and injury, desperate to find survivors or recover bodies. Engineers assessed damage to critical infrastructure: roads, bridges, power lines, vital lifelines now severed or compromised. The storm's fury had revealed deep vulnerabilities. Decades of unchecked urban growth, insufficient drainage systems, and climate change-fueled extreme weather had converged in disaster. Experts warned that without urgent reforms, the cycle of devastation would only worsen. Government aid poured in, but was often slow to reach the hardest-hit areas. International support began to arrive, a lifeline amid the chaos, but bureaucratic hurdles and damaged infrastructure slowed relief. Beyond the physical devastation, the emotional scars ran deep. Trauma counselors and volunteers worked to support survivors grappling with loss, fear, and uncertainty. Children, in particular, bore the invisible wounds of the catastrophe: nightmares, anxiety, and disrupted futures. Yet amid the rubble, glimmers of resilience shone. Communities organized cleanup efforts, neighbors rebuilt what they could, and stories of courage and compassion emerged from the darkest corners. The human spirit, battered but unbroken, fought to reclaim life from the wreckage. But the storm had also cast a stark warning, a brutal reminder that humanity's relationship with nature is fragile. The era of ignoring climate change and neglecting disaster preparedness was over. If the lessons of this catastrophe were not heeded, the wrath of nature would return, fiercer and more frequent. As the city struggled to stand again, the question hung in the air: how would it rebuild, and how long before the next tempest?